Zoya sat cramped in the bus, shivering uncontrollably from the intense cold. Her teeth chattered, and her feet were numb, barely registering any sensation in her toes. She cast a longing gaze out the window, contemplating whether staying at work would have been a better choice. But spending the night at the office seemed like a foolish idea, just as taking the bus home in this dreadful weather did. The blizzard outside seemed to taunt her as it raged unrelentlessly. They had been stuck in traffic for 3 hours, barely moving an inch. Zoya was only 2 stops away from her destination. On any other day, she would have disembarked and walked the rest of the way. However, today was different. The snow had been falling steadily since morning, and there simply wasn't enough time to clear the streets, even in the city center, let alone the residential areas. Furthermore, a gusty wind howled outside, sending chills down her spine. Zoya felt so frozen that she doubted her ability to make it home from her bus stop. She had no desire to attempt it from this point, so she patiently waited for the bus to finally reach her desired location. After another 20 agonizing minutes, the bus finally arrived. Zoya wrapped her scarf tightly around her neck and disembarked. The forceful wind threatened to knock her off her feet, and the snow piled up around her. Each step felt like a Herculean effort as she struggled to move forward, trudging towards her house. The distance had never seemed so immense. First, she had to navigate through a square, followed by a small alleyway, with a store situated nearby. Zoya prayed fervently that the store would be open. Luck was on her side. Zoya hurriedly rushed into the store, heaving a sigh of relief. She had a few precious moments to catch her breath before sprinting back home. Zoya purchased bread and milk, pondering the inconvenience of fumbling for her keys in the apartment entrance. She made the decision to retrieve her key inside the store, as her down jacket lacked pockets. Clutching the keys tightly in her hand, she took a deep breath and stepped outside. Walking was a struggle, with her feet sinking into the snow with each step. She only had to cross the yard, and she would reach her building. Just a few more strides until she reached the entrance. But then disaster struck. Her right foot encountered an unexpected uneven surface and twisted beneath her. Zoya flailed her arms in a desperate attempt to regain balance, but it was futile. In an instant, she plummeted face first into the prickly snow, completely humbled by the elements. Zoya struggled, fighting against the massive snowdrift that had swallowed her. She floundered and exerted every ounce of strength to regain her footing. Finally, she managed to stand, vigorously brushing off the snow from her face and hands. Clutching her bag of groceries, she prepared to make her way to the entrance when a sudden realization struck her. She still held the keys in her hands. With a sense of dread, Zoya surveyed the vast snowdrift. Somewhere within it lay her key. Powerlessness overwhelmed her, threatening to bring tears to her eyes. Exhausted, freezing, and now keyless, she couldn't even seek refuge in the entryway to warm herself. Collapsing onto her knees, she frantically began digging through the snow, her hands stiffened by the bitter cold. But the key remained elusive, refusing to reveal itself. Confusion enveloped Zoya. Should she return to the store to seek warmth before attempting to find the keys again? Yet the snowfall persisted. If she sought shelter, the keys would only be buried deeper. Doubt gnawed at her as she continued to wrestle with the snow. "What are you doing here?" A voice cut through the wind's cacophony. "Looking for my keys," Zoya replied, her voice feeble. She continued to dig in the snow, her strength waning. She couldn't muster the energy to raise her head and identify the person addressing her. Suddenly, strong arms scooped her up and carried her towards the staircase. Zoya found herself standing at the entrance door, finally able to see her rescuer. It was Sergi, her neighbor. "What are you doing?" Zoya attempted to sound angry, but her voice came out as a pitiful murmur. "I need to find my keys." Sergi swung open the entrance door and gently guided her inside. "Come on, let's talk in my apartment," he said. Zoya couldn't help but sob. "My keys will be buried, and I won't be able to find them." I'll find them, he assured her. Zoya looked at Sergey, her discouragement evident. Why had he chosen to help her? They had always despised each other. He frequently scolded her for playing the piano, even though Zoya practiced only during reasonable hours and for short durations. None of the other neighbors complained. Only this boorish neighbor couldn't seem to calm down. She had no desire to accompany him, but it seemed she had no other choice. Going back outside was beyond her weakened state. Take off your clothes, Sergey commanded, throwing the words at her. I'll put the kettle on. Maybe a hot shower will do you good. No, Zoya refused. I won't take a shower at your place. I want to go home. Sergey raised his hands in frustration. Are you going to dig again? He asked sarcastically. Zoya hung her head. No, she replied. I'll just have some tea. The apartment was cozy and warm. Zoya felt the pleasant warmth spreading through her hands, gradually thawing them. She followed Sergey into the kitchen. A real man would have helped me find the keys, Zoya told him. But where can I find one here? You haven't even had a chance to warm up properly, Sergey remarked. And you're already being sarcastic. I decided to show you some mercy. By the way, he grinned. How did our organized, meticulous Zoya end up in such an embarrassing situation? How did you manage to drop the keys? It's not very far-sighted to take them out ahead of time. It was cold. I thought it would be better to get the keys out at the store. Then I slipped. And please, don't make fun of me. I'm not making fun, I'm just surprised. Impulsive actions are not your style, he chuckled. You're ridiculously predictable. I know exactly when you start playing that awful instrument of yours. I know when you leave for work. You even have a schedule for your shopping trips. You seem to know a lot about me, Zoya observed. Are you keeping tabs on me? I don't need to keep tabs on you. You always act the same way, he replied. Sergey finished his tea and placed the cup on the table. All right, sit here. The kettle is on the stove. Feel free to have more tea if you want. If you decide to take a shower, you know where the bathroom is. There's a cabinet with clean towels. I'll go and look for your keys. I'll help, Zoya immediately volunteered. You'll only get in the way. Besides, you're still all frozen. I don't want you to catch pneumonia. Are you absolutely certain you dropped your keys where you were looking, and not somewhere else? Sergey declined. Do you take me for a fool? Zoya retorted. Just double-checking. I'm the one who'll be digging in the cold snow, he sighed. Well, don't bother digging then, she snapped. I didn't ask you to. Sergey sighed in irritation. You're exhausting, he remarked. By the way, if I can't find your keys, you'll have to spend the night at my place, so I'd suggest being more polite if I were you. With these words, Sergey walked out into the corridor. He threw on his jacket and slammed the door shut. Zoya approached the window and watched as Sergey left the building. However, instead of heading towards the spot where Zoya had dropped her keys, he went somewhere else. She observed as he reached his car and took out a small shovel. It became clear to Zoya that he was going to the place where she had fallen. The area was already covered in snow. Zoya watched as Sergey started digging. In that moment, Zoya realized that she was in his apartment for the first time. They lived on the same floor, but they could hardly be called friends. Quite the opposite. Zoya glanced around the kitchen. It was immaculate, with a new stove and a good refrigerator. His apartment was clearly better furnished than hers. She lowered her head in thought. Maybe she could take a quick peek into the bedroom. Zoya scolded herself for being curious, but she couldn't resist. She swiftly moved through the apartment, glancing into both the spacious living room and the bedroom. The place was tastefully decorated, with everything in order. Zoya even thought that a woman must live here. No, the decor had a masculine touch, but that level of tidiness. The taste reflected in every detail. On the other hand, she had seen Sergey with women, though not too frequently, and she had judged him for it. Hastily, she returned to the window. In the glow of the street lamps, she could see Sergey still searching for her keys. She silently pleaded for him to find them. More than anything, she longed to return to her room, take a hot bath, and fall asleep. Suddenly, Sergei straightened up abruptly and headed towards the entrance. Zoya clenched her fists tightly, hoping for the best. She waited. Finally, she heard the click of the door lock, and she swiftly stepped out into the hallway. "Did you find them?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. "I found them," the man nodded. Without thinking, Zoya tightly embraced him. The following day, Zoya felt a strong urge to do something to express her gratitude to her neighbor. Yesterday, when she had impulsively embraced him, there had been an undeniable awkwardness between them. She had hastily grabbed her belongings and sought refuge behind her apartment door. But now, how could she properly thank Sergei? As a single man, he probably didn't often treat himself to homemade treats. That's when Zoya decided to bake a cake for him. Throughout the evening, she kept an eye out the window, eagerly awaiting her neighbor's car to appear in the yard. Unfortunately, he was away for a long time, and the cake grew cold. Zoya's nerves began to fray. Thoughts of something untoward happening to him crossed her mind. The roads were still covered in snowdrifts, despite the subsiding snowstorm. The cleanup efforts hadn't fully addressed the aftermath. Finally, he arrived. Zoya waited an additional 20 minutes before taking the cake and venturing into the shared hallway. She rang Sergei's doorbell. "What?" Sergei opened the door abruptly. "Did something happen again? Have you forgotten where you live this time?" Zoya was taken aback for a moment. "Actually," she stammered, "I came to say thank you and brought you a cake." "A cake?" Sergei lazily grinned. "Seriously? Have you been watching too many American TV shows?" Confused, Zoya scrutinized the man. "What do soap operas have to do with it?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because seductive housewives bring cakes to their neighbors, and then suddenly they have an affair. Is that what you're trying to do? Do you want to seduce me?" Zoya lowered her head and studied Sergei intently for a few seconds. Then, with a sudden motion, she raised her hand holding the plate and hurled the cake at him with all her might. "Yeah," she shouted, "just a daydream. You're such a gift." The marmalade-laden cake splattered in all directions, leaving traces on both Zoya's face and Sergei's shirt. Zoya observed the bewildered expression on Sergei's face. He was clearly taken aback by her actions. She surprised even herself. Usually, she had excellent control over her emotions. Hastily, she spun around and disappeared behind her apartment door, slamming it shut and locking both locks. She sank down onto a small ottoman in the hallway, pressing her hands against her flushed cheeks in horror. What had she done? How had she dared to act so impulsively? Sergei would surely be furious with her now. But then, a giggle escaped her lips. She couldn't help but recall Sergei's face, dripping with marmalade. The mixture of confusion and stupidity was priceless. Zoya's laughter grew uncontrollable. 20 minutes passed, and she remained seated on the ottoman in the hallway, smiling and replaying the image of her neighbor's face in her mind. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and Zoe's earlier joviality vanished instantly. She hurriedly approached the door and peered through the peephole. It was indeed Sergei. The girl noticed that there was no more marmalade on his face or clothes. He had washed up and changed, and now he was most likely here to confront her. Zoya swallowed nervously. She couldn't bring herself to open the door. "Zoya, open up," Sergei demanded. "I won't yell, I promise." "Yes," the girl responded. "You'll just kill me, that's all." "Zoya, don't be ridiculous. Open up, let's just talk," Sergei pleaded. Zoya hesitated but reached out hesitantly to unlock the door. First one lock, then, after a brief moment of hesitation, the second. Finally, she pulled the door towards her. "Sorry," they both said simultaneously. Zoya looked at Sergei in surprise. "Are you asking for my forgiveness?" she asked incredulously. "Yes," Sergei confirmed. "I shouldn't have reacted that way. You wanted to make me happy. You made an effort. You baked me a cake. And I acted like a rude person. It was a terrible day at work, and I was exhausted. I took out my frustration on you, even though you were on my mind all day at work." I was worried about you, wondering if you were unwell, how you were doing. The cake must have been delicious, he added suddenly. I'm sorry. I'm sorry too. Zoya lowered her gaze. I shouldn't have thrown the cake at you. I don't know what came over me. I'm not usually like this. I actually liked it, Sergei admitted. It was so unexpected. I didn't know you had that in you. Zoya couldn't help but chuckle. You looked so funny with the jam, she blurted out. Do you find it amusing? Sergei looked at her with a hint of menace. I'm sorry, but yes, very much, Zoya replied. You had this surprised look in your eyes. With that, Sergei suddenly grabbed Zoya and began tickling her. So you're not afraid I might retaliate? He teased. No, you don't have to. Let go. Zoya continued to laugh. But in an instant, their eyes met, and Zoya felt a dryness in her throat. The laughter faded, replaced by an undeniable desire. How had she never noticed before how attractive Sergei was, how gentle his hands appeared, and how much she longed to be kissed by him? Zoya barely had time to think about how she craved the touch of his lips on hers when Sergei pulled her even closer and kissed her passionately. End. Thank you for subscribing and like it.